Hey there, welcome to episode 67 of the Cafe Genius Impresario's audio program, brought to you today on the 7th of June, 2024. Happy Friday. I think technically it's the first Friday, which here in Vegas means everybody's going to the Arts District because they think that's the only place you can find food trucks and more. But happy Friday. Why do I know all these things? Because I can appreciate today's topic. Cognitive load. Cognitive load. It sounds like a mouthful, but it really is much more than that. So, yes, let's get on with the show. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you have access to the episode description, which includes some show notes, a brief summary, which I will be reading, and then a couple of links. There are two of the normal shameless self-promotion links, and then there is a pair of Wikipedia links for workload. See how I confuse those things. I have too many things going on. That's why. So we'll get to all that. So yes, in the episode description, you should find these things. You will be able to find this audio program in the usual places. Ideally, we're inching closer to getting the real websites out for this and my other 3 weekly programs, all sort of orthogonal. So hopefully you'll continue to stay tuned, or if you're just joining in, I will, in case you're curious, impresarios. If you search in some places, you will find the spelling. It is essentially creative people, entrepreneurs, innovators, etc. This is an entire channel, audio program focused on the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem of the greater Vegas area in general. But hey, it could apply to you too, wherever you are. The summary of today's show, which I will be reading for my notes, but I may improvise. The joys of solopreneurship. That's when you're an entrepreneur by yourself. Couldn't find any co-founders. Or maybe you just want to be pursuing your idea by yourself. Solopreneurship the joys include substantial cognitive load as well as tackling all sorts of challenges across a variety of skill sets. And of course, priorities. Often highest priorities. Everything is the highest priority, always, all the time, even higher if possible. Task switching only amplifies the effect of cognitive load. And cognitive load is a term I've used, cognitive load, if I can speak correctly, is a term I've used over the years frequently, and I've never really thought about it in the terms that the 2 articles I've linked to. And again, as always, Wikipedia, great place to start your journey, learning. Rarely is at the end. But I have always imagined a cognitive load as a mixture of these 2 things, and I think they really are. But there are 2 takes. One is workload, cognitive workload. The other is related to learning. So it's the real cognitive, the actual internalized cognitive load. But before we get to those, the shameless self-promotion to be found at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. These are the places where I will post updates about the new websites, which I, dang it, hope I will be launching soon. The joy of being a solopreneur. Workload is never getting lighter. Buymeacoffee.com, it allows a sort of a free-form profile page. So I have various links, not only to where to find the audio programs, but GitHub projects and my favorite coffees. The beans that I purchase with funds, whether from buymeacoffee.com or not. Any funds that do go there are applied to coffee purchases. Coffee does power all of my projects. However, you are under no obligation to spend any money at either buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo nor ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com. Dan Hugo, that's me. I use these because they are generally in use for this sort of thing. I'm not creating these content projects, the content of these projects, I guess. I'm not producing these for money. I don't have actual sponsors. I am doing it as part of a sort of a overarching outreach engagement, and then eventually part of an experiment with a content creator discovery and connection with topics and so on. That will all figure in to the startup, which I've been talking about for the past few weeks, which we built on the work of Innovate for Vegas Foundation, the MyMuni project. So we will be launching the In Las Vegas project, a novel information sharing platform. Not quite a local news site. That's been done. Not social media. That's been done. So something new. So content creators, audio programming, video podcasts, whatever that is, video programs, influencer, foodie, TikTok, Instagram, shorts, whatever we can fit in their blogs. Remember when people used to write words so people could read them? Now AI is doing that for you and reading it for you too. So all that stuff will hopefully, if it all goes to plan, will figure into the picture of what your locality is. The people make up a chunk of that, and some of them are expressing themselves in a variety of interesting and useful ways. Don't let the algorithm fool you. So the next two, so those are my links there. The next two, the cognitive workload. And again, I've always used these as if they were interchangeable, just one cognitive load. The Wikipedia article, 2 articles, break it down into workload. So doing tasks, performing tasks, sometimes completing tasks requires a certain amount of cognition. You have to know what you're doing or what you're supposed to be doing. You have to know when you're done. You have to know what the conditions of success, the conditions of failure, what to do, how to recover from failure, etc. So even the simplest of tasks, in my early programming days, I remember the sort of creator of, for better or worse, of JavaScript was being interviewed, or somebody, I think it was for a book they were writing on JavaScript. And they asked, like, describe what programming is. And he gave this description, which is, it hadn't occurred to me like that. Although when you think about it, it is exactly this. He said, if you take anything you do, any task you do, he said, imagine you are about to walk. You're about to take your first step. You're standing. You're going to take one step to begin walking. You don't even think about it. But programming is controlling every muscle fiber, every nerve, reading every nerve, sensor input, reacting accordingly, mixing the nerve ending sensations of your movement, impact with the ground again, so lifting off and then reconnecting with the ground. Sensor fusion is mixing those inputs with your inner ear and your sense of balance, and then you can take visual cues, and then some of those things will change if you have any impairments or any limitations on some of those sensations, some of your 5 senses, or more. If you have more, great. So all of these things have to be accounted for when you're a programmer, and some of them are simplified with libraries and operating systems and so on. But you really begin to take note of all of the things that need to be accomplished. And I will quote my colleague when we were working on our robot project in college. He said, I really like working with the computer that we built. It was a little microcontroller computer back in the good old days before Raspberry Pis and Arduinos were everywhere. I really like working with this little system because there's no operating system to worry about. We just do whatever we want. So that is also true, but the result of that can be chaotic. So if you are a solopreneur, you have a similar sort of like, I can do anything I want. Nobody to get in my way. Nobody to help me. Nobody to hold up the other end of the couch, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things to think about when you are pondering workload, basically your to-do list, your tasks. And if you flip through that article and you have any interest in this, it's definitely a completely interesting subject area, especially if you are managing other people or if you're trying to collaborate with other people. Managing workload delegation and impact of task conflict and resource constraints and resource conflicts. And then I'll get into priority inversion a little bit later. So if you are working with tasks, your own or the tasks of others, if you outsource tasks to others, even something as simple as lead time, turnaround time, supply chain delays, all sorts of factors can flow into the progress that a task can make, whether it's late. I really like PERT charts for this. I know everybody likes Gantt charts, but PERT charts to me are more visually informative. So if you ever want to look into PERT, P-E-R-T, I should put a link to that, I guess. No, I'm going to let you, if you're really interested in that, because this is not about PERT and Gantt charts. Maybe that's another episode someday. But basically, if you can manage tasks for yourself, you're already ahead of the game with all the various conflicts between tasks and delay. One task will delay another task, or they're interrelated, dependent on each other, or they have to be done at the same time, and you're only one person. So you can attempt to delegate, but then you have to bring along some context, right? But by that I mean, if you ask someone to do a task, to complete a task, or there's why, or what do I need to know to accomplish this, or so there's any number of extra pieces of information that have to go with the task delegation, etc. So it can be quite involved. So the cognitive workload of managing tasks and managing interactions between tasks and so on is non-trivial. And then on top of that, there's cognitive load for learning. And so this Wikipedia page, again, great place to start if you have any interest in the learning process, how memory works, right? Learning something is a combination of memory and then muscle memory, cognitive memory, but developing neural pathways, access to information, connection, pattern recognition, classification of things, experiential memories. One of my favorite of evolutionary biology, the way they express this, it's the second time you see a new thing, so now it's not new, right? The second time you see a bear or a dog, maybe a bear is a bad example, a dog, you are slightly more inclined to feel comfortable around that dog because the first time it did not kill you. So the memory of interactions, of how things work, of how they didn't work, so learning from things, recognizing patterns and shapes, interactions, all these things. And then let me just pull up the article real quick to make a ref. Hang on. Yeah, there's a types section, cognitive load theory. So it's instruction. It's basically how you teach or how you learn, which is an interesting topic anyway. They list here, and again, just a place to get started, is intrinsic cognition, intrinsic cognitive load, difficulty associated with a specific instructional topic. So this is just, if you're not good with math and you got to do some calculus or some business calculus, as they call it, which is just discrete calculus, discrete calculus of sorts, difference equations, really. So maybe that's just hard. Extraneous cognitive load is information presented is not clear. So the topic may be tricky, intrinsic, or the presentation may be tricky, extraneous. If your teacher knows the topic too well, the teacher may not be able to explain it so well. That's one of those truisms. Those who cannot do teach, but those who cannot teach administrate. But yeah, so if you're unable to explain a topic, but you understand it really well, that's not supposed to be the case. You're supposed to be able to if you truly understand a topic, you should be able to explain it to someone else. And I believe there's I don't think it might have been Einstein. I don't know. He's full of quotes that are often attributed to him by mistake. The insanity one, not him. But something about you should be able to explain something. If you understand something, you should be able to explain it to a 5-year-old, or you should be able to explain it to make it simple for anyone to grasp. Right? If you are truly knowledgeable, you should be able to develop a way of explaining it to your audience. That's not always the case. And then a germane cognitive load is this is kind of interesting, is the automation of schemas. So this is basically a pattern. So you're learning how to. I'm oversimplifying, but it's sort of like repetition, right? So once you come up with a schema, you can reduce your load, your cognitive load, and how can I describe this? It's I suppose you could say like this is the beauty of repetition in instruction, right? This is where this comes into play. If you are, in fact, my math teacher in junior high school, when we were first learning algebra, 7th grade, Zeke Ashley, cool guy, he was adopting the Saxon method, the Saxon textbooks, which would mix current and previous advancements along a curriculum path so that you were essentially establishing the connection of notions and ideas, like what is quadratic formula? What is completion of squares? How does that fit into the next thing that we're doing? Well, the thing that you're doing today will include those things from yesterday where we talked about completing the square, or how do we solve cubics or whatever, right? So you can roll the previous lesson into the current lesson. So once you've established, you basically have momentum. So in your mind, you have this schema of, okay, here's how I'm going to be working with algebra. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, so check out the cognitive load section to get started. I've pondered learning along the way. Education is one of the other focus areas for Innovate for Vegas Foundation. That is like a co-creation approach to solving what should be by now obvious shortcomings in the educational terrain found in Southern Nevada and elsewhere. And fun fact, not only the My Muni project for the virtual Vegas capstone that we're focused on, but our education capstone. And I'm using capstone to mean like the keystone in an arch or the top of a collection of stones that are stacked up so I know some people treat the capstone like a final project, but here I'm talking about a summation of project work, and always ongoing. It won't be really done. But Virtual Vegas was a focus on making our smart city smarter. The education capstone was a collection of tools and efforts and ideally methodologies that would bring together students, teachers, parents, infrastructure needs to try to make the learning process better, because it certainly needs help here. So some of this stuff has entered into discussions previously, and I find it interesting myself. Perhaps you will as well. So on with the show. We're just now getting out of the link section. The link section, by the way, is the formal introduction to the topic, which is why I put the links at the top of my notes or at the bottom of the episode description. Solopreneurs and entrepreneurs doing something new and interesting or even familiar. You may already know. You may be opening your 3rd restaurant or starting your 4th consultancy as a business consultant or business strategist or whatever. With only the true belief in the cause to power the initial effort. That is, you have no money or you have only your own bootstrap funds, can be a substantial challenge, as some of us are all too aware. So if you've ever started a business, if you've ever started a company, even if it's not a formal business or company, but if you've ever, I will tell you this, my first, let me see I think it might be my first entrepreneurial endeavor in, I believe it was 5th grade. Yeah, I think it was 5th grade. My teachers were Mrs. Carnes, I think. Cairns, I think it was. Carnes. Her son was in our class. That was weird. But Mrs. Carnes and Mrs. Delfgaw, so team teachers, we had this big, giant, double-sized classroom, probably like 50 or 60 students, giant. And for some reason, origami started catching on. So paper folding, and so we learned how to make these paper boxes. And so this kid that sat in my little cluster of 3 or 4 desks named Dan Durhag and I decided to start a little company called D&D Associates. And so we would make paper boxes and other items and sell them to people for like a nickel or a dime. The big move took place when I added architecture or mechanical eraser refills. You'll find them at our architectural drawing stations. It's a long, thin eraser. It looks like a pencil or a pen, but it is a eraser The green ones were very popular. And so I would just sell the individual refills to people for like 25 cents. So good times. My first solopreneur, I think the erasers were just me. And then the paper selling was D&D Associates. So we were young entrepreneurs at the time. Not particularly crazy, but we did have to learn how to make these origami things and how to produce them and where to get paper from. And then we learned that we should stop using so much of the copy paper from the copy room. Entrepreneurs in general are typically understaffed. You never really have enough people, especially if you're not funded or if you're early stage. You're paying people with financial debt. You're paying them, not debt specifically, but you're paying them into the future with various forms of incentive, stock options or similar or equivalent, low pay now, promises of high pay, or some sort of a consignment program. There are people who've done quite well with that, so I'm not mocking that in any way, but you are sometimes asking people to take a risk with you in exchange for their essential efforts, and you have to hope for the best. Keep those fingers crossed that your idea, if your notion, if your startup goes somewhere. Tasks must be delegated internally, taken on by maybe one member of the founding group. Maybe that's one person, or the early team. If there are a few more people around, hopefully they have the particular skill needed, maybe not. And this could be anything from logo design, building a website. And there are tools out there to make those things easier. And then there are services where you can Fiverr, for example. You pay a very small amount of money for probably a reasonable amount of work, but it's rarely like perfect, but it's a beginning. You have to develop pitch decks and stories on it, which we'll be getting to in a moment. There's a lot of stuff. The minutia of getting a legitimate startup effort that is not a hobby off the ground is not zero. And not everyone has all of the skill sets necessary to go from 0 to 1, taking that first step, much less the steps that follow. In the case of solopreneurs, you have a team of 1. So every time you say, hey, can you, oh, that's me too. And I'm doing that now. I've done that many times. It could be consulting, or it could be an undertaking that requires a particular set of skills. That was a little movie reference. But occasionally you will be able to say from your travels and your experiences, hey, I could actually turn this into a business, or at least get a startup going, and then see if there are other people interested later. So that means there are all the things to deal with now. What sorts of things? So all forms of entrepreneurialism induce cognitive workloads from all angles. There are just a ton of things to do. I've read Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential several times. I recommend the audiobook, which he reads. I bump it up to 1.25x. I think it's perfect. If you go 1x, his voice, it just sounds very slow and boring. And I think he was probably more energetic till the end, unfortunately. So 1.25x audiobook as read by the author. Some of his stories, which the entire book is a collection of half-truths and less, as he admits. But the stories of life in the kitchen and the chaos and the always having to deal with the unexpected and so on, that part is probably true. I've worked in restaurant kitchens before, whether it was the restaurant my family owned or otherwise. Very rarely do things go according to plan from start of shift to end of day. So it's just something to be aware of, that every aspect of starting your own thing, especially if there are few or no other people to rely on, or who maybe they don't have the same, maybe they have the same level of familiarity as you do with some of the things, which is maybe none. Not everybody knows where to file documents, which services to contact for certain things. How do I even start a website? Even tracking down what would be best is a matter of reading and just doing some research, or making a decision and hoping for the best, and then making a new decision later, iterating. So the cognitive load of learning new skills on top of the cognitive workload of managing a collection of divergent tasks, which all seem to depend on each other, can be daunting. Inside your business, and you could argue whether this is inside or outside, but starting inside the business, you have all of your administrative tools, what to file, how to file, keeping track of your filings and where to put your files. You may have a filing cabinet. You may have a big giant hard drive, or you use the cloud. Calendaring, same thing. Scheduling things, meeting with people, tasks to be done by when. Basic accounting to get started, including, opening a bank account, but keeping track of the pennies that you might have available. And as the number of pennies diminishes over time, faster than you thought initially, you should keep track of that. Scheduling, again, calendaring, but also just a familiarity with how long things take, keeping track of those things, knowing when they're taking too long, etc. You can use some tools to do that, whether it's a piece of paper or a full-blown project management tool. Who knows? It depends on you. And planning of those tasks, scheduling and planning there are people that focus a career on that. So it's not trivial. Your office space, if you are going to have an office space, if you are not working from home, WFH for the win. But if you have anyone other than you may need to have meeting spaces. So it could be a coffee shop. It could be hot desking at a co-work space or a co-work spaces. If you happen to be in the same general area, you can meet in person. You might have to deal with remote conversations and occasionally meeting in person as needed. You might need to sign a lease for some office space, depending on how big you are starting off. You might, you may need an office space, but you may be opening a storefront. So your alternate or possibly additional concern is the store space, the storefront space. So you may be opening a restaurant or a store, like a bookstore or a clothing, who knows? Could be anything. So you want to have a place where you're going to be selling your product, preparing food perhaps. And there are tenant improvements, inspections for food, nothing but fun times. And that is a topic that comes up in Kitchen Confidential as well. Restaurants require things that normal people just don't think about. So that can be a huge cognitive load, both workload and mental. It could also be a huge source of stress and perhaps even early failure. Documentation. Who knows if you're going to bring on other people? If you're a solopreneur and you want to bring one more person on, the first questions will be, what are we doing? And if you've got nothing written down, you must spend time brain dumping or educating or giving some direction or specifying some sort of requirements. And that could be as an employee or as an outside consultant or a contract or a service bureau of some sort, external. So you've got to be able to describe what you're doing or what you need. Having some things written down, documented, helps immensely. You might also have to work on pitch decks, presentations, so that you can make formal storytelling an item on your path towards some sort of funding. And depending on what you're developing, you may want to create white papers, articles about your technologies, your innovation. Maybe you have to create menus. Maybe you need ingredient lists, right? There are certain things you need to be able to share with people in some sort of a structured way, not just rambling like, this is what we're doing. And then all of this is on top of the product or service that you're actually building this business around. So for all the things I just mentioned, only at this moment am I saying, oh, that's right, you got to work on the thing. In the case of my project in Las Vegas, there's the code development. So there's interoperability concerns, right? So some of the things we publish, some of the methods we use to publish information can take advantage of old technologies like email and new technologies like ActivityPub and ActivityStream. How do they mix together? How can we take advantage of these things? How can we make use of cutting edge technologies in the AI space to do classification and summarization, matching items so that a graph can be developed to show relative interactions between things, topical relationships and so on, timelines, maps, so that people are more familiar with the information that is being shared, so they have a better picture of what's going on and they're smarter, smart city. These are all things to actually spend time on, but you're also spending time on all those other things I just listed, plus all of the things that happen that you didn't think about. You never know. What was it in Contact when Jodie Foster's character is, was it Ellie? Can't remember her name. She's about to go in the second capsule, and they give her a cyanide pill, and they say we used to give them to the astronauts when they were going to the moon, because anything could go wrong, but mostly for the things we hadn't accounted for. So you never know what's coming down. You can make a list of things, and there's always going to be another page that you need to fill up with. Oh, I didn't even think of that. Speaking of outside your business, so this is stuff that's external. You still have to deal with it. And again, you can argue a couple of these. Business structure and paperwork. So do you have to file documents with your state? If you're forming a corporation, what is an L Corp? I'm sorry, what is a C Corp, an S Corp? What's an LLC? What's an LLP? Am I a manager? Am I a member? Do I have to fill out, what's our purpose statement? Do I need to get a board together? What's the rule? What are the rules for getting directors? Do I need to have that's a long list of things you need to suddenly begin to understand. And so both task, workload, I got to figure out where to file, what to file. I have to understand what I'm doing. If I make a mistake, how easy is it to fix? How much money is it going to cost? Clearly, if you have the money, an attorney or a paralegal who can help with filings such as these comes in handy. Not to mention your county, city, any other local filings, business licenses, inspections. Again, if you're opening a restaurant, there's countless additional layers of convenience to work with. Engaging an attorney if you can, or a paralegal, a bookkeeper if you need to keep track of money in a useful way. I guess you can use QuickBooks or something if you want, but good luck. Business development consultants. Am I even heading down the right path? Not to mention anyone who's if you need social media, if you need some sort of PR of any kind, media management in general, any other fractional contributors to your eventual success who are not employees. You may retain an attorney. You may have a part-time bookkeeper, or you may have a fractional CTO or a fractional CFO, or so on and so on. You may be paying people on consignment. Like I said, you may pay them in options. Famously in Silicon Valley, attorneys would work on a consignment basis. I'm going to assume they did it above board. So they would do work for startups in exchange for an interest in the company, stock options, or was it RSOs, or whatever they wrote down in an agreement. So law firms were doing quite well in Silicon Valley, balancing the 20% success rate, give or take. So these external services, compensating people for their inputs, is a whole nother thing to deal with. No pressure. Presentations and pitches for funding. Like I said, the documentation includes these things, but now you have to do them. So making the presentations, giving the pitches, identifying and talking to venture capital or other angel or other fund sources, individuals, presenting to potential partners, potential collaborators, directly, like internally. So you may want to bring in additional talent. You need to tell them what you're working on, and maybe early stage confidential. So you have to be aware of who you're talking to about what and when. Maybe you need to do some market testing. So you need to describe what you're doing to your focus group or anyone you're trying this out on, and the early adopter, the early alpha testers. You got to organize that pre-grand opening food tasting, et cetera, soft opening. Any sort of funding in general, you're going to have to be able to tell these stories. And over time, that bookkeeper is going to have to come in with some numbers, and you're going to have to talk about your total addressable market and all that stuff that if you are an entrepreneur, you're like, I know I got to deal with this stuff, but I need to work on the idea. day-to-day social media and other engagement with the world. So if you sequester yourself completely, the thing you're working on may no longer connect with reality. I know that sounds silly, but I've seen it. It's not funny, except it's kind of funny that you let yourself become so immersed in your pursuit, you stop interacting with the people who will be your eventual customers. So if you are not engaging with the world, some of which is your customer population, you may be building something that you think is amazing. And I may have told this story very briefly. Someone invented a keyboard, a split keyboard that was intended to be hanging around your neck. So if you're sitting on your couch, laying back, watching TV, you want to text or do something on your phone or create something, keyboard, you have half a keyboard for your left hand, half for your right, kind of hanging below your neck, so kind of resting on your chest or somewhere in there. And you type away. And I believe the person invested a ton of their own money, like, well, not millions, but certainly tens or hundreds of thousands, many tens, a couple of hundreds, perhaps somewhere in there. And the audience, receiving this presentation, somebody said, who here would use this product? And no one raised their hand. So this was the best thing since sliced bread for exactly one person. So you do have to make sure you at least pay attention somewhat to other human beings. And co-creation can come in handy here. It's a topic we can talk about in another episode. And then you kind of have to be aware of competitors and naysayers and negative press and complaints and bad reviews. And some of these things are, they're not available in the early days, but if you keep track of your competitors, you watch what people are saying about, say you are developing the humane pin. You don't have any competitors yet because you're kind of a new product category and you've got a lot of attention on you because you're former Apple employees and you have really pretty industrial design. Your product looks really cool. It's a shiny touch thing and a little screen that laser, whatever, that points in your hand and draws text, and I don't even need to look at a screen all day. And that looks amazing. It doesn't really work. I'm only laughing because I've been there. So when Rabbit launched their product, hopefully they were paying attention to their competitor in this space, competing in this new product category, certainly not on price, but probably because they were absolutely not paying attention or didn't care, or who knows, they launched a product into the same collection of criticality. This doesn't work. That's a pretty good one. Pretty valid. All the promises that both Humane and Rabbit were making, all of the claims about all the problems they were going to solve and all the functionality these products would bring and all this, they just completely failed. But if the team, if the people involved were paying attention, if they were actually on the ball at Rabbit, they would have been watching the Humane product rollout intently, and they may have been. But if they really were, they probably would have either delayed releasing version 1, or what I would have said, in my opinion, the Rabbit R1 beta, actually alpha, but beta, be the first to get the beta Rabbit. And then we're releasing this. Everything's version 1 beta, version 0.9, whatever. This is an early adopter. Provide a direct feedback loop, right? Like, hey, if you find a product, you have some feedback, you want to be a part of the next, you have early access to version 1.1, whatever it is. You make early adopters special, make them valuable. The Humane pin was so ridiculously expensive by comparison and equally broken, so that was almost certainly a lost cause, but they could have attempted something very similar. So you have to keep in touch with the outside world during all of this. And again, you still have to work on your idea. And then, of course, anything we haven't thought of. This entire list of things is 1% of the possibilities of things going right or wrong that you have to deal with. And by the way, everything I'm talking about right now is really the early stage. It's you, solopreneur. It's you and your 1 or 2 or 3 other co-founders. You may have a contractor. You may have a couple of employees. You're still super tiny. So expenses could hopefully reasonably manageable. We haven't even thought about this, none of this. And even if you have a bookkeeper, some point they're going to come to you and say, hey, you're burning 10x the rate you were a year ago because you started manufacturing things, you started shipping products, you started doing more marketing, you're creating content, you're shipping demo units to reviewers. Maybe you have a restaurant, so now you're purchasing ingredients and you're dealing with food waste and you're dealing with all the joys of that. So depending on what your business is, once you are out of startup mode, well, it's arguable when that really happens, but once you are actually shipping product, manufacturing things, delivering, selling, everything gets more complicated, especially those numbers, and you have to keep a really close eye on them. So that's yet more to be aware of. So more cognitive workload, more occasionally, more things to learn about, more actual cognition that will be required to keep track of everything, not only the tasks at hand, but the interrelationship of all things, interconnectedness of all things, I should say. And so, yeah, it only gets a little bit more tricky every day once you reach the end of the beginning. Once you begin shipping, in the world of product engineering, ship date, the golden master, as we used to call it, the GM. That's the official product that we're going to sell. Now go make 1 million copies of it, or go manufacture identical to this one. I have worked at places where there's GM1, then there's GM2 shortly after, and then GM3. So it kind of loses its meaning by then. But there's always these complications, always something comes up, always a last minute, and then not to mention the steady state or even turmoil of those initial ship days, or your grand opening, if you like. So cognition and workflow, all the tasks I just listed, and I know I was meandering a little bit, but that I'm implying that nothing really goes to plan when you're doing this stuff. So there's always a little something to deal with. And then you have the added joy of like data breaches. And I think there's some Cloudflare drama going on as I'm speaking today about a gambling website that they didn't want to host anymore. So they're charging them $125,000 to get their domains back or something crazy. So there's just always a fire to put out. There's always something to deal with or to work around, something new to learn. So cognition and workflow, you will find that everything I've listed here, they will be interdependent on each other. They will, some things I've listed as inside will kind of be outside and vice versa. There will be things that aren't even in either of those two categories. They invent themselves and you're like, where did this even come from? This was not on the list. They'll cross over. You'll be surprised. And there'll be nuance that you hadn't accounted for. There will be things that they seemed okay, but then you're like, oh, that's going to take a little bit more work than I thought. Or turns out I don't know how to do this. So some tasks preempt others. So you have to attend to the bigger fire. You have to figure out how to make that assessment. That's another task. But there is management and thus cognitive overhead for managing preemption. That is, you have to, like I said, you have to figure out which is which. So you're managing the preemption of one task for another. You're managing how the tasks depend upon each other or can be pursued independently. Maybe you can delegate or outsource a task if it is independent, right? One task that depends on another, if you outsource one or if you delegate one of the two tasks, in this simple example, the delegated task suddenly becomes another piece of infrastructure to manage because whoever receives that delegation is now a part of your workflow and they may not have the same priorities that you do, et cetera. So it only becomes more complicated as your task list fans out, as your delegation of workers, if you want to look at it as workers, the workers could all be you. But the workers could be your co-founders. It could be trusted confidants. It could be untrusted outside sources that get limited access to information. And there's NDA structures and agreements and payment terms that encourage project completion on schedule and so on and so on. So all of these things start to add to your cognitive workload, right? Making a contract, maybe a snap. You may have done this 1,000 times, the 1,001st piece of cake, but it is still a piece of workflow that you have to manage. So it still counts as cognitive load on the workflow side. And then managing preemption is a whole another program. I mean, if you are into multitasking computer processes, you have some idea of, just like I mentioned earlier, about taking a step, the minutia of muscles and nerve endings and sensory nerves and motor nerves and balance and visual sensor fusion. So similarly, managing tasks, preemption of tasks, parallel tasks, task dependencies, tasks that are taking too long. It is much more problematic if you run into priority inversion, which I'm going to speak about in more detail. But priority inversion, very briefly, when when you don't get to the more important task because a less important task is taking up your time. So perhaps you say, I have to deal with this situation. You get on the phone. It's not a super high priority task. It's like our cloud bill didn't get paid. The credit card didn't get billed correctly, or the PO didn't go through, or whatever it is. So you get on the phone and you got to talk to somebody to get this sorted out because you don't want your website to get shut down for non-payment. You're going to do it today because you want to get through because it's Friday and you just want to make sure that things don't go south on the weekend. So you're on the phone, you're on hold, but you finally got to talk to a person, so you don't want to hang up and have to start over. But at the same time, an incoming like, oh, we got to deal with this right now, and you're like, but I'm on the phone, I got it. So priority inversion can happen, and you don't even expect it. But a low priority thing you probably could have put off till Monday, or you could always call back, but you don't want to. But you're escalating. It's a parent priority in your task queue, your mental workflow queue. But a higher priority event, a higher priority task comes along and you defer it, you delay it. And so priority inversion may be taking place where you are switching priorities inappropriately. And that can lead to problems, especially if you don't know you're doing it. So humans are not good at multitasking. That's been proven many times over. If you are a solopreneur, you may need to maximize your use of automation tools to get around this, because you may believe you are multitasking, but it turns out you're doing one task okay, and you're doing the other task or tasks horribly. So that you're sacrificing one task that you could do well for one task you're doing half so maybe, and then the other tasks are suffering. However your manifestation of not multitasking comes out. So if you are a solopreneur, you need to maximize the use of your automation tools so that you can try to kick off tasks that can take place automatically. For example, maybe your cloud billing situation could be managed with an email or a chat window. That now you're not on hold. Now you can deal with this other incoming thing, and you can maybe in the chat window you say, "Hey, can you email me the final resolution on this? Because I got an emergency here." You can at least, because you're not waiting on hold, so you're able to make use of technologies and schedule tasks so that they overlap a little bit, but they don't block each other. It's super complicated compared to this example, but you may, on top of all of these things, need to learn new skills. So that might complicate things even more, and that could become a priority inversion issue as well. Like, I need to deal with a thing that I don't yet understand, so I got to read articles, I got to go to a class, I got to learn a process, I got to consult an expert, an attorney or a bookkeeper or an accountant or whatever, HR, the list goes on. So you must add that education, that learning cognitive load to your task list. And that's why I say these two things kind of mix together. I always use them interchangeably. I guess you can technically focus on them as an intra brain and an extra brain consideration. That was sent me thinking about too many things at the same time. Multitasking. If you have to learn new things, that becomes a new task. That becomes a blocking task, perhaps. So now you're, before I can accomplish task of one priority, I must learn some new information to properly address it. And so it becomes a high priority, but then a higher priority comes along and you're like, but I got to cover this other thing for the lower priority item. So I got to learn something new to address that. But a higher priority thing comes in, but you may not assign it the high priority or the priority level it needs because you're like, I'm trying to read this article. Yeah, things can get pretty fun. Then you have cognition and learning. So like I said, I usually mix these together, but the process of learning is far too complicated. We're not even going to shallow dive into that today. Yeah, I would say it's complex. Complicated means there is a workflow or a recipe or a set of steps. Complex implies that there are some unknowns, that things we just don't know yet. That's certainly true of the learning process, how we process information internally, mentally. So we're not going to ponder those here, but we can easily accept that learning new skills, developing an understanding of requirements and processes and methodologies, especially with a ticking clock. We got to finish this by tomorrow. We got to finish it by Monday. This can be profoundly challenging in the face of all the other things that we're talking about. At the same time, I got to learn this too. It could be support tasks. It could be the list of things that are not the main focus of your business, or it could be, we have a new problem. We have a roadblock. We're doing something innovative, and we didn't ponder this item that we have to get around. And so now you got to figure out, you got to be inventive or creative or have a workaround of some kind. If you're the rabbit guys, you're like, don't worry about the humane pin. We just got to release our product. We're not even going to worry about how we implement things. We just have to make them look like they work. In version 2, it will work better. Maybe that's what their mindset was. It didn't work so well for the customers, but real-time learning under pressure, that's always fun. Cramming for a midterm. Who hasn't done that? As we all encounter now and then, learning something, especially something new, can increase the likelihood of confusion. Have you ever mixed up terminology? Like, I can't even think of an example right now, but you're learning something new and you drop a word that's fresh in your mind into something that is completely unrelated. And if you're talking to someone, or if maybe you're writing an email and you're like, why did I say that? Because it's on your mind. And so you're mixing them up. You're trying to learn something new under pressure. Got a lot of stuff going on at the same time. Not good at multitasking. You're using an incorrect value from a different pursuit. Like you're like, okay, it's 38. You're like, no, that's the value for the other thing, right? Now you're not even sure which is which. Hopefully you don't mistake the metric system for the imperial system when you're trying to build a Martian probe. That really happened, not with me, but there's all kinds of instances where learning under pressure with that ticking clock, trying to learn, can lead to this confusion. There's distraction. You might confuse filing dates. You might send the wrong document to the wrong recipient, and the list goes on and on. So when you're one person, this can all multiply, which can impact how we make progress in our novel yet essential areas to further our entrepreneurial cause. So some things are new to you. Some things are related to your new idea or the new parts of your idea. Your idea might be old, but there might be new things. So new to you, new idea that will be new to the world. The new things are things you can't yet really account for. So you're kind of learning along the way. Only makes things more fun. It goes without saying, if your pursuit is something novel or involves some innovation of some kind for which you are a principal, you are splitting your focus and cognitive capacity between the future and the present. So I read that verbatim, but what I'm saying here is that when you are an entrepreneurial innovator in particular, when you're doing something new, and this could be, because usually if you're going into something entrepreneurial, you've identified a problem, you've identified a gap, you have a solution, a novel solution. You may be opening a coffee shop, right? So somebody will say, another coffee shop? Well, you might be bringing something new to the table. There's a coffee shop in Hungary called Cafe Free, Frei. Look it up. So cool. I first encountered the not so long-lived Cafe Free in in Liffey Valley in near Dublin. For years, I had said every coffee shop is a espresso coffee shop, right? You go into a coffee shop, you're either going to get pour over or drip, or the drip coffee. It'll be either in a pot or a carafe or a what do they call those things? Like air voids. Or you're going to get a pour over. You're going to get an espresso. That's about it. People don't really take, if you try to find a Turkish coffee in Vegas, you would think there'd be plenty, but no, not very easy to find. So you have opportunities with the global variety of coffee preparation methods and beans and styles of everything. There's so much on the table, literally, yet everything is, not everything, a lot of espresso, right? Entire global powerhouses, Starbucks, Peet's, Seattle's Best, which I think became part of Peet's, they're built on espresso drinks. So for the longest time, I was saying, you go to a Vietnamese restaurant, you can get a Vietnamese iced coffee. You go to a Middle Eastern restaurant, you might find a Turkish coffee or an Arabic coffee. You could go to an Ethiopian restaurant and get an Ethiopian coffee, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. Why are there not coffee shops? It's always the restaurant. And, clearly there are logistical concerns. You cannot support every method of making every kind of coffee in a coffee shop. Or maybe you can, and you call it cafe free. So when I was in Dublin and I stopped in, I literally went to a mall on the weekend just to see what is a mall in Dublin like? And it wasn't even in Dublin proper, it was in Liffey Valley. And I walked in there and I was just wandering around the mall, went to the newsagent, topped off, I should say, my Leap card so I could ride the Dublin bus. And lo and behold, a map of the world with little coffee icons all over it. Went into the cafe free there, and I can get an Arabic coffee and a Nicaraguan tobacco coffee prepared in the traditional style of each region. Sign me up. So I did, and it was delightful. So cafe free still in existence. So the point of all that is that you can make a coffee shop, and if somebody asks you, coffee shop, why a coffee shop? And you say, well, I'm doing something unusual. Sometimes that's, people can't even fathom. What? You just make espresso and you put it in a cup and you write my name on it. What else is there? So doing something that people perceive as run-of-the-mill, just a knockoff of something franchise-like. So you can still do something novel, but that becomes a challenge, right? Because all the aspects of the novel part of your idea are, for some, uncharted territory. So that's where you get to learn. So the nice thing about doing something familiar, like a coffee shop, is you can surprise people with your novel take, with your creativity, with your innovation. You can do the same thing with software technologies, with hardware technologies, etc. So you can ideally make your efforts a little bit more productive by minimizing the novel. For version 1, make it novel, but only to the extent that you are able to support making the novel. Novel as in new, not as a book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about priority inversion because it's not something people intuit so often. It can be a serious problem. In the best cases, introducing a workload debt where the higher priority items are delayed. So priority inversion is literally, normally high priority comes first, low priority comes next. If you invert the priorities, the low priority item is preventing you from getting to the high priority item. So it shouldn't work that way, but however you've implemented your day-to-day, your workflows, your to-do list execution, you are allowing, or you are not accounting for, or you're not even aware that a higher priority task needs to get done, but you're not doing it. And so it becomes debt, right? You still have to deal with it, but now it's sitting on your to-do list on your backlog. And the higher priority items may have a time limit that you are not accounting for, but you are allowing the lower priority task or tasks to pause them, to delay them, and this can be a cognitive load. It can be, I got to deal with all this stuff that I wasn't even able to focus on at the time, and now it's super important, or it may have a time limit. It may be a literal fire, right? You never know. As priority inversion impact increases, so if multiple high priority tasks are delayed, or if the priority inversion lingers for too long, so maybe it's one really high priority task, but now it's aged, it could be minutes, hours, days. There will be an increase in dependence on task management. So you've got to now say, okay, I got to put the high priority task. I finished the low priority task, and now I got to deal with the one or more high priority tasks that were delayed. They were queued, so they're ready to go. They're ready to be dealt with. Now I have to adjust for that in my task management, my time management, my scheduling. I got to cancel a meeting now because I got to deal with the high priority thing. So the scheduling of the meeting becomes it's a lower priority task, but it may get higher priority because now you have to spend the time rescheduling the meeting with someone. You got to get them on the phone. You got to send them an email. You got to make sure they sync their calendar so they're not sitting waiting for you and getting angry at you. So now that lower priority task is really preempting the high priority task once again. So you could get into this loop where your high priority task is sitting there waiting, and you keep having to deal with small fires instead of the big one, right? You got to deal with communication, other tools. You got to make sure that you are addressing the high priority task to completion while still dealing with all these other allegedly lower priority tasks. But again, you have to manage that. So your workload, your cognitive workload can be tested. The worst part about priority inversion is when we don't know it's occurring. And I have one of my favorite stories when I was working at salon.com. There was a person who was manually adjusting the ad delivery priorities. So they were prioritizing a free promotion. It was a charity, or maybe it was house ads. This person was prioritizing delivery of those ads into the available inventory, while highly paid ads, which should have been higher priority, were sitting in the queue. So they were not being used. They were not being deployed. They were not being displayed in exchange for the money that was paid for them. So if you have undelivered ads at the end of a time period, you're like, well, I paid for this, and now the promotion is over, whatever it is, right? Maybe it's we're paying a lot of money to advertise this event that's on Saturday. Well, come Friday, if you haven't displayed any ads because you've been displaying free or charitable organization or house ads, you've inverted the priority of your ad delivery, and it could cost you real money. The person that was doing that thought that they were adjusting the ad delivery in a good way, but they were really doing it the exact opposite way. So the way we get into this mode is misjudging the cognitive and or workload of a particular task. So in this case, the person just didn't know, and they didn't know that they didn't know, so they didn't know to ask. So they thought they were doing the right thing, didn't know how to find out that they were doing the wrong thing or how to fix that. So now you have a particular task that you've kind of miscalculated. The low priority task is taking longer, but you didn't account for the priority and how it stacks up against higher. You didn't account for the risk of spending the time and the focus on the low priority versus any high priorities that might be backlogged at that point, preempted. So it prevents us from attending to high priority tasks. Okay, so while it may be useful to assign a time limit to other constraints to the task, you might say, okay, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes and then I got to see about this higher priority thing. You can try to limit the impact of priority inversion. It's not always obvious in situ. And so we can be distracted from checking those constraints. And at the end of the day, best laid plans don't work. This is one of the joys of solopreneurship, is that you don't even have someone else looking and going, hey, why aren't you dealing with the bigger fire? So it depends on you. This is where making lists, some people eschew or even abhor to-do lists because they view it as like an unneeded stress, or it doesn't work for everyone. But you do need to manage things like priority inversion. So here is where best method for individual wins the day, probably makes the difference between a good day or week and otherwise. Let's talk about tools and methods. First, as a solopreneur myself, solopreneurs always It's always a bad idea. Unless you make it a good idea. That means you have to account for all of the shortcomings, all the challenges that are completely irrational, and accept the fact that there will be many times no one that will look over your shoulder and say, why are you doing that? Shouldn't you be doing this instead? So there's no checks, no balances. Kind of like being a dictator. It is important to know up front that there are going to be simultaneous challenges to face. They're going to tax your time and task management skills, abilities, bandwidth, mental capacity, patience, and they're going to challenge real cognitive load capacity often. So just juggling tasks is one thing, but actually keeping the things you got to figure out, the things you got to solve with, you've never done this before, you never had to deal with this. I will tell you, the first time I went through the formation of a nonprofit in Nevada, I had no idea what I was doing. Now, 5 minutes, done. Because it really is a 5-minute task, or 10, maybe 15. If the Silver Flume website is up for Nevada State, Secretary of State. All that said, at the same time, if you are by yourself, then you also have to account for other paperwork, other tasks, other minutia of varying priorities and time limits and completion times and how they fit into your schedule, and then the things you forgot, the things you didn't know, etc. So so keeping track of these things in your own mind and learning new things along the way, and then managing the tasks and all the delays and the working with other people and their delays and so on, can really multiply, making solopreneurship an impossible task. It really is. It should never work, ever. Obviously, there are technologies available that kind of help, and some things that are coming along the way. You're reading all about AI that will, of course, help you instantly without any trouble, any confusion, certainly no hallucinating. They do not, but do not forget, though, the value of the classics. So I myself like dry erase boards. I would love to have like a 4x8 hanging on my wall, but I use smaller, like clipboard size dry erase now and then. Fun fact, you can actually go to a production by road. You can actually go to your Home Depot, your Lowe's, your similar store and get surfaces that are, you can get a 4x8 sheet of whiteboard. I can't remember the name of the material. You can get those for, in the tens of dollars usually. And if you can hang it on a wall, you're good. If you're going to get a nice mounted on wheels with a pen tray and now you're talking triple digits, maybe more. So the tool is useful and people charge good money for it, but you can make your own, and you can, I have been known to get sample tiles, a nice glazed white tile. And then I use wet erase markers on that so I can draw small things. So if you want to make a diagram or a list or something, and then wet erase is nice because the ink will dry on the glaze. Difficult to erase, so you actually have to wet it and then you wipe it off and you're good. So you can make a to-do list that won't get accidentally erased, but you can also take a picture. Notepads, pens, paper notebooks, and the feedback loop from actually writing. I typed a little bit extra loud there. I typed look instead of loop. I type all the time. My handwriting is horrible, but proven fact, the physicality of drawing notes, of the interaction between the hand, the pen, the paper, the pencil, the paper, the gesture, the making of the glyphs, the drawing of the boxes and the connection, the node lines and stuff. These are all components of learning or retention. So do not discount the value of the old ways. In-person meetings are often underrated. I know here in Vegas there's a unfortunate belief that meetups can be just social events and transactional client trolling, but to actually get work done or to actually engage with your colleagues, your co-founders, whether it's project related, to-do lists and whatnot, or to just take a break and interact like normal human beings. So you could be on topic or off topic. And this is the return to office movement is like, life cannot continue if you don't have this, 8-hour a day, 40-hour a week in the building we're paying rent on. But the fact is, it's probably closer to once in a while. So if you and your co-founders, or even if you're a solopreneur, if you can find someone who is also a solopreneur that you proactively put pencils down and actually interact, you may be stuck on something. There may be a little jog in your cognitive load thanks to speaking to another person. They may have already solved their version of that problem. So do not underestimate the value of the normal, the good old days of talking to people. And then, of course, hands-on creativity. So if you are spending all day typing on a keyboard like I do, and you don't go outside, I don't want to say touch grass, but if you don't go outside and do something else, if you don't make something, I myself became a expert, if not professional barista during the pandemic lockdown days. So I conscientiously make coffee. I use AeroPress for my daily. So I do inverted AeroPress. I have a frother. I've pondered getting a steamer, but the frother to me works okay. So I froth some heavy cream. That may make people ick, but I like heavy cream in the frother. Today, I literally dropped in some Baja Gold salt, like very large salt crystals, not quite salt you would put on your sidewalk if it's snowing, but some definitely bigger than salt shaker salt. So very rich in minerals, trace minerals. So I put about 2 shakes. So I'm going to say like probably 25 grains of this high caliber salt into the frother. I've not been trying this, but I was always under the impression that salt in the frother was going to break down. And this might be true with a finer grind of salt. So salt in the frother, froth it up. I put some salted caramel Tirani sauce in there too, syrup sauce. So a little bit of sugar-free salted caramel Tirani, 2 shakes of some Baja Gold. It's not sea salt, dry lake bed salt, something, and high in trace minerals. Then AeroPress, inverted, press it in. A little potassium salt in the actual coffee. Why? Because potassium is good for your blood pressure. Keep it low. And then put the heavy cream in there, and then a couple of taps on my cocoa powder shaker. So a little bit of cocoa powder, which is nice because you smell it. So the smell goes in your nose while you're drinking your morning coffee. So that little ritual is a part of a nice day, a nice way to kick off the day. I'm telling you this because these things are part of your solopreneur journey to maintain sort of a relationship with the not work parts of your day, because it's very easy if you spend all of your time. And in my travels, because I was actually in the real Silicon Valley, there were people, including myself, that would go into an office, sit at their desk, and then not leave for more than 24 hours. Don't do that. It's not good for you. Learning how to use a new tool or method adds to the cognitive load. So if you have no idea how to use a spreadsheet, if you have no idea how to make a website, how to use Wix or Squarespace, or maybe you want to hand code an HTML website and you want to learn Tailwind or React for some odd reason, these are things that you have to add to your cognitive load list, because even though the task of launch a website seems like it could take an hour or a day, first I have to learn React, and I have to learn how to set up a web server. I have to learn how to provision. Once that list starts to unfold, your cognitive load and then the task load may start multiplying, because you got to learn new things, you got to learn new processes, you got to learn how to apply what you learned. All that can spiral up and out of manageability. So you got to keep track of your workload accordingly. Everything takes time, and with a new thing, there is bound to be error. That means you just learned how to do it, so you don't know yet what you don't yet know. So you can make errors and so on. Then you got to know that you made an error, track it down, debug it, And it could be software. It could be something as simple as a recipe for barbecue sauce for your new barbecue restaurant. And you're like, is there something wrong with this sauce? We're opening in 2 days and the sauce is not right. Now what do you got to do? You got to figure that out. So all kinds of real-time issues, things you got to figure out, debug, learn. AI tools are going to fix all that, though. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. Or maybe AI tools are like a really smart toddler, like a brilliant little 2-year-old that knows how to read and wait, that sounds like somebody I know, knows how to read, but still has no wisdom of the world. And so the ability to write code that seems to work, or a really good email, or a really creative marketing message and so on, when you read through it, you're like, oh, what kind of went off the rails here a little bit. Hey, you introduced a security flaw. Hey, you copied code directly from this other project. So you still have to check it. So you're just trading one cognitive load for another, with the possibility of a different collection of tasks and other various things to deal with. So we're coming to the end of today's episode, believe it or not. A couple of things about my own journey, because I have been talking about, since I have my own guest on my own audio program, my own journey in building the In Las Vegas project on top of the My Muni project from the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, which I am the managing director of. So when you find yourself wearing all of the hats, you have to be mindful of where your brain cells are allocated. I used to be better at task focus when I was working with other people. Even if you're working on a task by yourself, if there are other people working on tasks that are sort of decoupled but related, a good example would be the hardware for one of the projects I was working on at Philips, designed by my college roommate who we worked together at Philips. So he was behind me, cube next door, working on board layout, schematic capture, and board layout. And I would say, hey, we have to change the pin. We have to go from pin 5 to pin 3 for this one signal. And he's like, okay. So he would do it. So we could communicate like that in real time. And so our parallel development paths were tightly coupled, information sharing, but we could proceed independently otherwise. So there was always someone who kind of knew what was going on, because he was always working on the corresponding hardware to the software I was developing. But at the same time, you're working on something by yourself, solo, right? So that was effective once you're by yourself, especially if you're not talking to people on a regular basis. It's very easy to let priorities slip, let your workload debt accumulate, to allow priority inversion to take over. And so low priority things like making coffee in the morning can, no, this is not true, but as an example, if you let that rule the day, like, oh my God, I'm out of coffee, I must get more coffee for tomorrow. If you let that preempt the things that you were supposed to accomplish today, then you end up with priority inversion. And so that can happen to anyone. That has not happened to me in this case, but it can happen to anyone in general, and sometimes it's unavoidable, but you have to know how to recover. So I used to be better at task focus, and I'm still okay at it. And I have found that if you can let the distractions go away, it's a lot easier to focus on the task at hand. So that part if I may self-assess, I'm good at, but the distractions, which depending on how I assign the priorities, it's not a matter of priority inversion. It's a matter of priority proximity. And I did a whole episode of Let's Innovate for Vegas on order of operations. The way priority lists are constructed depends on who's looking at them, what's important to whom, etc. So everything gets more complicated when you're the only one, when you're the solopreneur. So it's something to always be aware of. And it takes more time, and it depends on too much working. And if you have to depend on other humans to come through on things, or to be available, or to provide answers or deliverables, you have to depend on them behaving rationally. That's a big one. Some of these things are beyond your control. Some of them you must recognize that they are beyond your control. I think that's one of the 12 steps, isn't it? Don't know. I'm learning that at least some of these cannot be relied upon, however. And when I say learning, I mean I've been learning this for 50 plus years. So it's not a surprise, but the impact of some things, you must adjust expectations based on your surroundings. Luckily, I am proficient enough with technology so that I'm able to use the tools, to learn a new tool as needed. I can make things, I can build things, I can debug things, I can determine how things work, I can read technical documentation, etc. So for me, this is a pretty solid advantage. I am not necessarily good at explaining everything to everyone, so I'm not too bad at it. It depends on what it is. In a pinch, if I'm trying to explain something quickly, I tend to drop context. So that's probably the real shortcoming. Over the years, I've been able to explain fairly technical things to fairly entry-level people. Occasionally, for example, in hackathon context, explaining how to make an Intel Edison work to a couple, literally a couple of people who just wanted to try it. And they were 70 years old and had never done this before. By the end of the weekend, they had a functional thing that they intended to build. And so it is not a skill I lack, but I do run into how much context to provide in order to explain something, to outsource or to delegate or to otherwise collaborate. That can be tricky. One way to get around that, as I mentioned earlier, is documentation with the assumption that you will have other people working on things. If everything is in your head and then you forget things, and everybody who's ever tried to write any sort of comedy or music or other creative work, you have a great idea. I will write that down later. Famous last words. So writing things, creating documentation, user stories, plans, what do you intend to do, at least a rough draft, so that if other people need to join a project or collaborate with you in some way, you can at least say, well, here's where things are, or here is the intent at this time, and we can adjust accordingly. That, by the way, is one of the value propositions of the agile methodology, with people have lost sight of. So everybody thinks it's a horrible idea, but it's really not that complicated. As well, I have enough real-world experience, and this is really key. I have real-world experience with technology, but I also have real-world experience with media, with press, news site, publishing, building systems that do the publishing and move data around and connect things. So having actual practical experience is certainly helpful, and that can be helpful with whatever you are working on. This allows me to spend time on the incremental differentiation, so I can assume that I basically understand the mechanics of publishing. It's not quite a blog, so you have to be concerned about things like ontology, folksonomies, or other taxonomy, like finding things. A blog tends to be fairly straightforward. It's a one or small number of contributors. But as the types of information, as the number of contributors, as the sources, as those all start to multiply, it can become a thing. So knowing some of these things going in is helpful. So the ability to focus on the differentiation rather than on the entire top to bottom notion is somewhat helpful. It reduces the cognitive load, but it doesn't reduce the workload, if that makes sense. But knowing that going in, I think, is helpful. If some might be overwhelmed, I'm not saying I have any magical powers, but if you're overwhelmed because you wanted to accomplish something, but I didn't know all these things, that's a challenge that many people encounter, and it can lead to good startup ideas by really interesting and talented people not progressing because they didn't know what they didn't know. And it happens all the time. And I know I hate to see it, and I would hate to see it for myself. So I think those are things I can account for. But generally speaking, the tasks at hand for a solopreneur are almost certainly, like there's an old joke, when you're estimating time on a project, take your initial estimate and multiply by pi. Probably something similar, right? Like, I need to do 100 things to make my startup go. And you're like, it might be 300. It might be a little bit more than 300. So knowing that you don't know everything is a good thing to know. Knowing that you may have to account for things you hadn't accounted for, knowing that you have to learn things you don't yet know, how to apply them, etc. Invaluable, and these are things you just kind of pick up along the way. You can certainly be told these things. Maybe at the end of this audio program, you're like, I got it. Now I'm going to, nope, don't even think that for a moment. I've only shown a light on the wall. You're seeing shadows in the Plato's cave scenario. Hopefully you know what that is. Only when you have seen the real world will you know just how bad an idea you have gotten yourself into. But that shouldn't stop you. You have to make it into a good idea. And that just takes a few incantations and maybe contractual consignment of your soul. Anyway, thank you for listening as always. This was an interesting episode to put together, mostly because I'm in situ myself. I'm working on these things. Literally had our office hours yesterday talking about education elements and the decentralized collaboration notion that we want to pursue to try to bring other civic volunteers together. So civic volunteerism is an element of the development of the MyMuni and related projects for the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. Working on those in a collaborative way will bring new ideas and will hopefully enable people in other geographies to take some of these ideas and use them where they are, because local news is kind of a problem. It's kind of dying, or not really as useful as it could be or it could have been. So hopefully there will be a value proposition that works for remote contributors and civic volunteers who would like to work on projects that don't affect only one locality. So the decentralization notion is important to that. And then if we can actually deploy a working platform that accomplishes the various things we want to accomplish into a region that has so many people visiting from so many places, we may be able to show people from well beyond the greater Vegas area some new ideas about new ways of doing things. And that could be this particular project, or it could be some other things we have in mind. And we can build on that exposure to a small fraction, but a diverse fraction nonetheless, of the population of the globe. That's pretty grandiose, but 40 million people from beyond. I told a colleague of mine from Shenzhen that the population of Shenzhen is about 20 million. So if 2 times the population of Shenzhen were to pass through Shenzhen from other places every year, you'd have a significant exposure of whatever it is you're working on to people who would otherwise be unfamiliar. So that's an opportunity here to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation by people beyond the Vegas area, but to share those efforts with people who visit the Vegas area and then go home and say, hey, that was pretty cool. And who knows what will come of that. It all fits together. Don't forget buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo for updates, links when we eventually launch the website. See, when I say that I'm going to launch the website, but I got all this other stuff going on, I'm not kidding. Launching websites is like super important to me, but not important in any other way. But eventually, websites for my 4 main audio programs, Cafe Genius Impresarios, Quaggling Sand, FFS Talk, and of course, Let's Innovate for Vegas. They will all have their own primary point of publication online, and you'll still be able to find them in the usual places. And all of this will be updated on those coffee websites. You're under no obligation to buy any coffee. Don't worry. You're welcome to if you like. And it will all go towards coffee, which is it's about time I make some coffee beverage. And I will leave you with that. Happy weekend or whenever you're listening to this, and we'll catch you next time.